Well, President Obama has pledged active engagement for a fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. In his first day in office, Obama called President Hosni Mubarak of Egypt, Prime Minister Ehud Olmert of Israel, King Abdullah of Jordan, and President Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority. He did not reach out to leaders of Hamas who rose to power in democratic elections 3 years ago. Meanwhile, Obama plans to announce the selection of former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell as Middle East envoy. Mitchell is expected to travel to the region for almost immediately upon taking the post. Obama will also meet with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton later today. Israel declared a unilateral ceasefire in Gaza on Saturday, 3 days before Obama was sworn into office. The 22-day assault killed more than 1,300 Palestinians, most of them civilians, at least a third children. More than 5,500 were injured. Hamas also declared its own week-long ceasefire, which ends on Sunday. Hamas is demanding an immediate reopening of Gaza's border crossings and the lifting of an Israeli blockade. This is Hamas spokesperson Fawzi Barhoum.
But we are stressing that the stopping of the aggression and the withdrawal of the occupation, God willing with no return, is not enough. What is needed is a complete ending of the siege and an opening of all crossings, and a guarantee that the Zionist occupiers won't go back to this ugly operation.
Israel has refused to fully open border crossings to allow desperately needed aid, goods, and construction materials into Gaza. Meanwhile, exiled Hamas political leader Khalid Mashal claimed unequivocal victory over Israeli forces in the Gaza Strip.
This
is the first war that our nation has won on its land. The first real major war. That's why the battle in Gaza is a turning point in the conflict with the Zionist enemy. It is establishing with its achievements, its timing, its greatness, a serious and active strategy for liberation that begins from Palestine and extends with the support of the nation to everywhere.
Robert Pastor is a senior advisor on conflict resolution at the Carter Center and a professor of international relations at American University. Last month, he traveled to Syria with President Carter, where they met with Khalid Mashal of Hamas. Robert Pastor served as national security advisor on Latin America and the Caribbean under President Carter from 1977 to 81. He joins us now from Washington, D.C. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Robert Pastor. Can you tell us about this crucial trip you took just before the Israeli assault?
Well, we have, of course, visited the Middle East many times before that and had previous conversations with Khalid Mashal. But on this trip, it occurred just before the end of the 6-month ceasefire. And the question is whether it would be renewed. On the part of Hamas, they made very clear that they had done what they could do to try to stop the rockets, and indeed from the period from late June to November 4th, when the Israelis intervened in Gaza to close down a tunnel, they had virtually stopped the rockets. But from their side, Israel had not complied with the ceasefire. It was supposed to have lifted all of the border crossings, allowing 750 trucks a day to go in. That never came close to occurring. In the absence of opening of those crossings, they said they would not renew the ceasefire.
Well, one of the things that Israel has been repeatedly claiming is that during the ceasefire that Hamas was restocking, increasingly smuggling in more arms into Gaza. Your response or sense about the veracity of those claims?
Oh, I have no doubt that Hamas was importing rockets during the entire period, but that was never one of the elements in the ceasefire agreement. I don't even know if it was seriously negotiated by Israel through Egypt. So their importing the rockets did not necessarily imply a violation of the ceasefire agreement. The key element from the Israeli standpoint in the ceasefire was to stop the rockets. Hamas acknowledged that it did not stop them on June 19th, which was required under the agreement. But within 10 days, they were able to stop it. And between then and November 4th, a total of 11 rockets, fewer than 3 a month, were fired. And according to Hamas, most of these came from militant groups, including one associated with Fatah. So from their side, they felt they pretty much kept to the agreement.
So can you explain, Robert Pastor, who exactly you and President Carter communicated with?
Well, in Damascus, of course, we met with the Politburo and Khalid Mashal. I went on to the West Bank and Israel and met with senior leaders from both the Palestinian Authority and other Hamas leaders, as well as senior Israeli government officials. And in the case of Israel, communicated very clearly that Hamas felt and was willing to contemplate extending the ceasefire if Israel would lift the siege on that. I think by this time they considered it, and they said they would get back to me with a very specific response, but they didn't.
Exactly happened on November 4th?
On November 4th, Israel intervened into Gaza to shut down a tunnel. There is some dispute as to whether that tunnel was intended to capture an Israeli soldier or whether it was a defensive tunnel to protect against an Israeli incursion. But in the course of that particular incursion, which of course was a violation of the ceasefire, 6 Hamas militants were killed. Hamas then responded with 124 rockets that month. So to a certain degree, the ceasefire was broken as early as November 4th, but technically it was to extend 6 months until December 19th.
Now, Robert Pastor, the continuing insistence by the Israeli government and backed by the U.S. government that they will not deal with Hamas. In most other wars or conflicts, the belligerents eventually have to negotiate some kind of a settlement. To what degree is this helping or hurting the peace process in the Middle East?
I think for the peace process to go forward, the ceasefire needs to be made much more sturdy. And they need to learn lessons from the first ceasefire from June 19th to December 19th and what went wrong. I would say the most important single lesson is there was no agreed official text between the two sides. The Israelis would not acknowledge, would neither confirm nor deny the text that Hamas gave to us and that I showed to them. Some people suggested that the elements in it were correct. But it was clear that Israel did not want to fully accept such an agreement. If a ceasefire is to go forward, they will need to. I think, secondly, the United States should play a role in this mediation effort. It's clear that Egypt is now questioned by Hamas as to whether they were an honest broker. And indeed, there is some evidence that perhaps they said different things to each of the two parties. I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know that if they want to make the ceasefire work, a good mediation is essential. The text needs to be agreed to. All of the elements need to be agreed to, and it needs to be enforced and monitored in a way that the first ceasefire was not.
So, Robert Pastor, are you saying that it was Israel that broke the ceasefire and that the Israeli assault could have been avoided?
I'm saying that both sides violated the key elements of the ceasefire. The rockets never absolutely completely stopped, even though they went from about 250 a month to fewer than 3 a month. From the standpoint of Israel, that may not have been good enough. On the other hand, from the principal concern of Hamas, which was to open the barriers, Israel really never tried very hard to open them. The numbers of trucks on average that went in increased from 100 to 200, but the amount that was supposed to go in was roughly 750 a day. Israel never came close to that. I think, as I said, to make the ceasefire work, both sides need to comply. I think with regard to the question of whether Israel had an alternative than to invade in Gaza, I think the answer is obvious, that it did. That an effective ceasefire, full compliance with the agreement, would have stopped the rockets without the terrible loss of life that occurred.
If Israel had an offer from Hamas to extend the ceasefire, if it ended the blockade, why do you think Israel attacked?
I think Israel was of two minds. First of all, whether to accept any deal with Hamas. They were never very clear on what their objective was. Was their objective to exterminate Hamas, which is an awful goal, particularly for a country born of the Holocaust? Was it to punish Hamas or to disrupt their command and control, or was it simply to stop the rockets? We've never heard a very clear declaration of objectives on the part of Israel. And so we don't really know what their intention was in going in. If it were to stop the rockets, however, it is clear that they did have another alternative other than a massive invasion.